The human digestive system. So in this lesson, we'll be answering the question, why do we have a digestive system? What are its main components? What digestive enzymes are used in the process? What's the difference between chemical and mechanical digestion, and how do they aid in digestion? We're going to go over a couple of activities. We're going to talk about digestive organs as well as accessory organs which help in the digestion. So why do we need a digestive system? Well, when we eat food such as bread, meat, and vegetables, they're not in the form that the body can use. Food and drink consumed must be broken down to smaller molecules so that they can be absorbed into the body. Very similar to the way that we need to chew our food before we can swallow it. Those large pieces won't fit into our throat, so we need to break them into smaller pieces with our teeth in order to get them down. It's the same idea with the digestive system. We need to break them into smaller pieces to get them down. It's the same idea with our digestive system. The pieces that we take in need to be small enough to be absorbed into our body. What are the components of the digestive system? Well, the digestive tract is a series of hollow organs joining a long, twisted tube from the mouth to the anus. Essentially, you could stretch everything out into a really long tube, where if you took something at the top of the tube and dropped it down from the top, it would go all the way down, right through, and fall out the other end. There are no actual end to the digestive system. It's just a hollow tube with an opening at the top and an opening at the bottom. Now, what are the organs that are involved? Well, we have the mouth. That's going to be for our chewing. We have our esophagus. That's where the food passes into once it leaves the mouth and before it gets to the stomach, which is our third. We have our liver, which is not actually part of the tract itself, but what's called an accessory organ. We have the pancreas, which is hidden in right there. We have the small and large intestines, and we have the rectum. Components of the digestive system. The entire length of the digestive system is lined with epithelial tissue. That's like our skin tissue. It contains lots of goblet cells, which secrete a mucus. The mucus does two very important things. Number one, it protects the entire tract from the digestive enzymes. So we have these enzymes floating around breaking up the food, and if we didn't have this mucus, it would actually break up our digestive tract as well. And it's going to help move the materials along the tube. Digestive enzymes. So we just talked about how the digestive enzymes need to be prevented from attacking the digestive tract itself. Well, this is what digestive enzymes do. So digestive enzymes help break food into smaller pieces so that it's easier to digest. We talked about chewing earlier and how that enables us to get the food from the mouth to the stomach. The digestive enzymes do that as well, but on a smaller scale inside our digestive tract itself. So the digestive enzymes break food into smaller pieces like we see in right here. Okay, so that enzyme, that could be any enzyme. There's multiple different enzymes depending on what kind of molecule we're looking to break up. In this case, this enzyme is going to attack the starch molecule, and it's going to attack these bonds here. And when it eats these bonds, that's going to break our starch molecule up into these individual components here. And you can see that these are smaller. They're small enough that they can be absorbed into our body, which is, again, the goal of the digestive system. The mouth. So let's start with the mouth. Digestion begins in the oral cavity in the mouth, where two types of digestion take place. Number one, we have mechanical digestion, which is going to be our chewing. And number two, chemical digestion, which is going to be using our digestive enzymes to help break our food down. So let's look at them in a little bit more detail. Mechanical digestion. So our chewing, like I said, is going to break up our large pieces of food into smaller ones. Just like we take this large block here and we chew it, we break it into these much smaller little cubes here. And that allows us to get that food into our digestive tract. If it wasn't broken down with our teeth, it wouldn't fit into our esophagus. Chemical digestion. So the human body releases 1 to 1.5 liters of saliva per day from glands in your cheeks. That's a lot of spit. Saliva converts carbohydrates into simple sugars like glucose. Saliva also contains mucus and water, which makes food easier to swallow. So if you think about if your mouth is really dry, it's hard to chew food, especially really dry food like crackers. So our saliva is going to go in there and help make that food all mushy and slimy so that it goes down our throat. But at the same time, it's also breaking those bonds like we talked about previous with those digestive enzymes to help break our larger molecules into our smaller molecules so that we can digest them. Esophagus. So our food enters the esophagus, which is a narrow muscular tube, which is about 25 centimeters long. Food is swallowed by voluntary action, so it's something that you control using your tongue. And you can actually measure how long it is. So if you take a ruler and put it just underneath your chin to about midway down your body, that's about how long your esophagus is. So about 25 centimeters, so just under a foot long. Esophagus. The trachea, or windpipe, and esophagus are connected. So the esophagus here is this pink thing at the back, and the trachea is this blue arrow here pointing to this yellow thing on the left-hand side. So why does food not go into the lungs? As this trachea actually goes down to the lungs, and that's how the air we breathe gets into our lungs. Well, there's a very small flap of connective tissue called the epiglottis, located right there, which is this guy right here, which flaps down. So when you swallow, this thing changes shape and actually goes down here and covers up this section here, so that food can't get in to the trachea, which is very important because you don't want food and drink going into your lungs. However, when you do things like drink milk, when you're laughing, sometimes when you're breathing, air needs to come up and down the trachea. Obviously, when you're laughing, you're breathing. And sometimes this flap can be left open just a tiny bit, and when it is, sometimes the drink can get down there. And that's why if you're drinking and laughing at the same time, sometimes, especially drink, can go down the wrong tube, and you can start coughing, and it has to come up. Now, sometimes also, if you're doing things like talking or laughing while you're eating, sometimes food can go down there. Because again, as you're talking, as you're laughing, air needs to come up and down the trachea, and sometimes this epiglottis doesn't close properly before the food is actually able to get in. So if you swallow something, and at the same time you're laughing and talking, sometimes that food can go down. And if that food goes down and gets stuck in the trachea, that's when you choke. Now, the wall of the esophagus is made up of 2 layers of smooth muscle, which helps push the food down. Now, if you were upside down, which you technically are in space, so if you think of it like that, the astronauts, there's no down in space. So this is very important for them, especially. But if you were to try to swallow, which I wouldn't recommend again, but if you were trying to swallow while upside down, you could, because the muscles in the esophagus here that line the esophagus are going to help push that food from here that way down into your stomach. So whether you're upside down, right side up, food will go down because of the muscles in the esophagus. However, again, I do not recommend. It is dangerous because food can more easily slip into the trachea while you're upside down. So let's not do that. Now, what I want you to do, though, is to feel those muscles. So I want you to gently place your hand over your throat and swallow. So what do you feel? Now, turn to someone next to you, and if you don't have someone next to you, go find someone, and have them tilt their head back. And I want them to swallow. And I want you to look at their throat as they're swallowing, because you can see those muscles in action. And it's pretty cool looking. So the further back they bend their head, the easier it is to see the muscles in action. So give it a try. Stomach. The stomach acts as a storage place for food as well as a place for digestion. It is described as an elastic bag made up of muscle, which expands. It expands so much that it can hold up to 4 liters of food. Now, the best way that I think to show that is that when you buy milk at the grocery store, maybe you do this, maybe you don't, you can either buy it in 2 different forms. Usually it's either in a large jug or you buy it in a bag that has 3 smaller bags inside. Well, typically that large jug and these 3 bags combined equal 4 liters of liquid. So technically, you could drink the entire thing of milk and it would all go into your stomach. That's how much your stomach can expand to accommodate. Again, another something that I wouldn't recommend because you will throw up before you get all 3 bags down. But technically, it could be done. Chemical digestion. So your stomach also produces acid, which helps break down protein. The stomach does also secrete mucus to protect the lining from the acid. So just like earlier when we were talking about the mucus acting as a protecting layer for the digestive tract, this is a very good example. So the stomach secretes this acid to help break down food, but that acid would also break down the stomach if it wasn't for this nice protective layer of mucus around the stomach, around the inside of the stomach. Mucus. Now, sometimes this acid exits the stomach and enters the esophagus, which isn't good. So if you get that acid in here, that's good. It breaks down food. But sometimes it goes up here, and that can lead to things like heartburn or acid reflux. Now, just like the mouth, the stomach also does mechanical digestion. Now, the mechanical digestion in the stomach involves the muscles in the stomach wall. So the stomach wall is very muscular, and it's going to churn and contract, kind of like squeezing a partially inflated water balloon. You can imagine, the contents inside kind of churn as you do that. The water moves around as you squeeze the outside of the water balloon. It's the same idea. So as the stomach does that, it churns the food and moves it towards the small intestine. So it's going to move it in this direction and eventually into the small intestine where further digestion can take place. And the growling sound you sometimes hear is your stomach moving. And this is, again, smooth muscle. So just like in your esophagus, the stomach has smooth muscle, which you cannot control. Now, speaking of the small intestine further splits food into smaller pieces. Most of the nutrients we take in are absorbed in the small intestine, so it's a very important part of the digestive system. You can see our larger molecules here. This is representative of the small intestine, so that's like the wall of the small intestine. That's the other wall of the small intestine. And the food is just floating in through that. Now, it came from the stomach, so if we want, we can say the food is going that way, and the stomach would be right there. So food is going from the stomach to the small intestine, and it's in these pretty large pieces. So the digestive enzymes inside the small intestine are going to break those big pieces into smaller pieces, which we see represented here. So again, that's the same thing. It's still the small intestine wall. This is just further down the line after the digestive enzymes have broken down the food into smaller pieces. And then the smaller pieces can then be absorbed into the blood. They need to be small in order to be absorbed, otherwise they just simply can't pass that barrier. Now the small intestine is pretty cool. The small intestine receives many digestive enzymes from the pancreas and liver to help break down foods. We talked about that, the digestive enzymes that help our big pieces of food go from big to small. And those enzymes, again, come from the pancreas and liver. Again, it's going to use smooth muscle to move our food down our small intestine. The lining of the small intestine secretes a protective mucus, just like the stomach, to protect it from the enzymes. And it's about 7 meters long, which is about 22.5 feet. And it's about 2.5 centimeters, or about an inch in diameter. And has a surface area of 250 square meters, or about 2,700 square feet. And that is about the approximate size of a tennis court. So if you were to take the small intestine and lay it completely flat with all its surface area shown, it would cover the area of a tennis court. Pretty remarkable. Next up is the large intestine. Now, sometimes the large intestine is called the colon. Its main function is to absorb water and vitamins from the remaining food. It also stores the remains of the food that cannot be absorbed, so the waste, before they're flushed from the body. Now, if you have constipation or diarrhea, the drugs that you take actually target the large intestine. If you have constipation, you get a drug that helps absorb less water. If you have diarrhea, then you get a drug that causes your large intestine to absorb more water. Now, it's about 1.5 meters, or about 5 feet long, and 6.5 centimeters, or about 2.5 inches in diameter. And that's why it's called the large intestine, not for its length, but for its diameter. It has a much bigger diameter than the small intestine. The rectum, the last stop. The rectum acts as a temporary storage facility for feces before they're excreted from the body, and it's located right there. The last place is the anus, and that's where the feces come out. Now, we talked about all the organs that are involved in the actual digestion process where the food passes through. So those are the organs that were part of the tract. These accessory organs help with the digestion process, but food doesn't actually pass through them. So these include things like the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder, which all help with the supply of digestive enzymes. The liver also produces bile, which helps digest fats. These substances are delivered into the small intestine. And these are going to be our main players. We got our liver here, we got our gallbladder there, we got our pancreas there, and you can see the actual digestive tract is laid out here in pink. So this part right there is the actual digestive tract, and that's where the food goes down. And then you have these other organs, which play a huge role in the actual breaking down of that food inside the tract. So first up, the liver. The liver produces bile, which is stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder is right there. Bile is then sent to the small intestine to break down fats. Now that gallbladder, although it's just a temporary storage facility for the bile, is very important. Now you can live without it, mind you, or have some other issue that causes your gallbladder to be removed, and you'll still be fine. The difference is, when your body needs that influx of bile, your liver is going to go into bile production, send it in to the small intestine, but it's not going to be a huge dumping of bile. Think of it as a on-demand service, whereas the gallbladder has a huge storage of this fat-dissolving bile. So if you eat a really fatty meal, this gallbladder is full. All of a sudden, it's just going to go, okay, well, let's send all of our bile into the small intestine, and you're going to get a huge influx of bile. So gallbladder equals an influx of bile large enough to help break down those fats much more efficiently. But again, if you don't have the gallbladder, your liver will still supply the bile. It'll just be in a smaller quantity. Pancreas. The pancreas is involved in supplying enzymes required for digestion directly into the small intestine. The pancreas also secretes a hormone called insulin directly into the bloodstream. This is very important. Insulin causes most of the body cells to absorb glucose, and an inability to utilize insulin is a cause of diabetes. Now, there are two main types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is when the pancreas pretty much doesn't do this very well at all. Type 2 diabetes is when it does do it, but the body's not very receptive to that insulin. And that concludes our lesson on the digestive system.